What happens when the man who has everything risks it all for a secret he can't control? We're talking about Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, whose life looked like a modern fairy tale. A penthouse overlooking the city, a company changing the world, and a beautiful pregnant wife, Amelia, by his side. Tonight was his crowning achievement, the Croft Foundation Gala, a night to celebrate family legacy and charity. But in the glittering crowd, a secret was hiding in plain sight. A secret affair. He thought he had it all managed, all compartmentalized. He was wrong, because the guest of honor, a surprise to everyone, including him, was about to walk on that stage and expose a lie so devastating it would bring his entire empire crashing down. Julian Croft lived a life curated for magazine covers. His days were a symphony of calculated success, conducted from a corner office on the 80th floor of the Croft Tower, a gleaming shard of glass and steel that pierced the New York City skyline. He was the visionary behind Nexus, a revolutionary AI platform that had seamlessly integrated into the fabric of modern life, making him not just wealthy, but culturally significant. At 38, he possessed a sharp intelligence, a disarming smile, and a charisma so potent it could bend rooms to his will. His personal life was the final, perfect brushstroke on his masterpiece of a public image. He was married to Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. The name itself was a legacy. Amelia was not just a billionaire's wife. She was the heiress to an old money dynasty, a woman of quiet grace, formidable intellect, and timeless beauty. Their union was seen as the perfect merger of new tech royalty and established American aristocracy. For the past 5 years, their life had been a whirlwind of galas, board meetings, and exclusive holidays in St. Bart's. Yet beneath the polished veneer, tiny hairline cracks had begun to form. They were almost imperceptible, visible only to those who knew where to look. The silences during their drives back from events had grown longer. Julian's hand, which once rested naturally on the small of her back, now felt like a formal, practiced gesture. The most profound change, the event that should have bonded them closer than ever, had ironically widened the chasm Amelia's pregnancy. After years of heartbreaking struggle of quiet tears and clinical procedures, they were finally expecting a son. It was a miracle they had both prayed for. Julian had been ecstatic, making a public announcement that sent Croft Industries stock soaring on the wave of good PR. He commissioned a state-of-the-art nursery and spoke effusively in interviews about the next chapter and his greatest legacy. But in private, a strange distance had settled in. He became more absorbed in his work than ever before. "It's for the baby more," he'd say, kissing her forehead, before disappearing into his home office for hours. "I'm building an empire for him." He missed prenatal appointments, citing unbreakable meetings with Tokyo or Zurich. He was physically present in their sprawling penthouse, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, his phone a fortress he guarded with a sudden, uncharacteristic jealousy. Amelia felt the shift in the very air she breathed. The warmth had been replaced by a polite, sterile chill. She was 7 months pregnant, her body changing in ways that were both miraculous and terrifying, and she had never felt more alone. Her high-risk pregnancy required her to be careful to reduce stress, but a low-grade anxiety had become her constant companion. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface of her serene composure, a feeling that she was living with a beautifully crafted hologram of the man she had married. Meanwhile, at Croft Tower, another life was playing out. Isabella Rossi was the company's senior vice president of global marketing. She was everything Amelia wasn't: sharp-edged, ferociously ambitious, with a fiery energy that matched Julian's own. She had clawed her way up from nothing, and her hunger for success was palpable. She understood Julian's drive, his restlessness, his need to conquer. She spoke his language of market shares and hostile takeovers of risk and reward. Their professional collaboration was electric, producing the company's most successful campaigns. But late-night strategy sessions fueled by expensive whiskey and the intoxicating thrill of shared ambition had bled into something more. It started with a lingering touch over a blueprint, a shared glance that held for a second too long a text message that was professional on the surface but hummed with a dangerous subtext. Isabella knew about Amelia. She had seen the society photos, the perfect couple smiling for the cameras. In her mind, Amelia was a relic, a beautiful but outdated accessory to a man like Julian. She believed Julian when he spoke of a marriage that was more of a business arrangement than a romance, a duty he felt bound to. "It's complicated, Bella." He would murmur, his head in her lap, in the sleek, minimalist apartment he kept under a corporate pseudonym in Soho. "We haven't been truly together in years. The baby. It was our last attempt, but it didn't fix what was already broken." He sold her a story of a gilded cage, and she, wanting to believe it, bought every word. She saw herself as his future, the true partner for the man he was, now not the boy who had married into a legacy. Julian, a master of compartmentalization, believed he could manage it all. He loved the stability and class Amelia provided, the perfect image of home and family. But he craved the fire and validation he found with Isabella. He thought he could have both worlds existing on separate parallel tracks that would never intersect. The stage for their collision was being meticulously set. The annual Croft Foundation Gala was just a week away. This year's theme was Building Legacies, a charity event to launch a new national initiative for underprivileged families. It was Julian's magnum opus of philanthropy, designed to cement his image as a benevolent titan of industry. He would give the keynote speech. Isabella, as the marketing genius behind the event, would be there watching from a key table. And Amelia, his beautiful pregnant wife, was expected to be on his arm, the serene Madonna, to his benevolent king. Julian had the script for the evening perfectly planned. He just didn't realize he was no longer the one directing the play. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in Julian's duplicity. He was a man playing two intensely demanding roles, and the strain was beginning to show, though only in the minutest of ways. To the world, he was the devoted husband and expectant father. He was photographed leaving a high-end baby boutique bags in hand with a quote for the paparazzi about nesting. He approved the final seating chart for the gala, placing Amelia at the center of the head table, a place of honor. To Amelia, he was solicitously distant. "Are you feeling all right, Mia? The doctors said you need to rest," he'd say, his concern sounding more like a directive. He bought her a stunning sapphire necklace to wear at the gala, the Croft Blue, the media would later call it. He laid it in its velvet box on her vanity, a beautiful, cold and silent apology for absences he never explained. Amelia accepted the gift with a quiet, gracious smile that no longer reached her eyes. Her suspicions had moved past intuition and into a realm of painful certainty. The catalyst hadn't been a single dramatic discovery, but a slow, agonizing accumulation of evidence. A credit card statement he'd left on his desk, showing charges for a florist near Isabella Rossi's apartment for restaurants Amelia had never been to. A whispered phone call he thought she couldn't hear his voice, dropping to an intimate, urgent tone she hadn't heard directed at her in years. "Not now, Bella. I'll see you tonight. Yes, I promise." The final brutal confirmation came from a simple forgotten item, his secondary tablet, the one he used for work drafts. He'd left it on the nightstand, and in a moment of weakness that she would later see as strength, she opened it. He hadn't even bothered to password protect it. There it was. A thread of messages. Hundreds of them. Photos. Plans for a future that didn't include her. Promises of a life together after the timing was right. The most cutting messages were about her. Julian, she's just so fragile right now. I can't add any stress. Isabella, I know my love. But when do I get all of you, Julian? Soon. After the baby is born, after the gala, I promise you, this life with her. It's a photograph. You and I are the real thing. Amelia sat on their perfectly made bed, the cold screen of the tablet illuminating the silent tears tracking down her face. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. Every shared memory, every vow, every tender moment from their past felt instantly corrupted, rewritten as a lie. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was humiliated. He had painted her as a weak, fragile thing to be managed, a problem to be solved, before he could move on to his real life. For a full day she was paralyzed by grief. She stayed in her room claiming she felt unwell, which wasn't a lie. Her soul was sick. The urge to confront him, to scream and throw the tablet at his head was a burning fever in her veins. But as the hours passed, the consuming fire of her rage cooled into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous resolve. She was a Vanderbilt. Her ancestors hadn't built their fortunes by shattering in the face of betrayal. They had rebuilt, strategized, and conquered. Crying in her bedroom would give him the satisfaction of her weakness. A messy private confrontation would allow him to control the narrative, to gaslight her, to paint her as the hysterical, pregnant wife. He had made this a public humiliation in private. She would return the favor. She would not be a footnote in her own life, the fragile wife left behind. She would be the architect of his reckoning. Her plan began to form, elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. She knew the Croft Foundation was Julian's proudest achievement, the source of his carefully manufactured public virtue, and she knew that she, as his wife, had a significant, if often ceremonial role within it. Her family had been one of the foundation's initial seed investors. Legally, she held more power than Julian realized. She made a call to Daniel Levine, the gala's event coordinator, and a man whose career her family had helped launch years ago. "Daniel, darling," she said, her voice smooth as silk, betraying none of the turmoil within. "I have a small surprise I'd like to arrange for Julian on the night of the gala. A tribute of sorts. It needs to be kept in the strictest confidence. I want to be introduced as the evening's special guest of honor." Daniel was taken aback, but the request came with an authority he couldn't question. "Of course, Mrs. Croft, but Mr. Croft has already approved the program." "And now I am amending it," Amelia stated, a new steel in her voice. "There's also the matter of the Foundation's annual legacy gift. I'll be announcing it myself this year. Please ensure the teleprompter is loaded with a speech I'll be sending over to you on the day. And Daniel, your absolute discretion is paramount." Next, she met with her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, a formidable man with a hawk's gaze and an empire of his own. She laid out the truth, her voice steady, presenting the evidence without tears. She didn't ask for his help. She outlined her strategy and asked for his support. He listened in stony silence, his fury at Julian, a palpable force in the room. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "He has underestimated you, Amelia. He has underestimated our family. You will have everything you need." In the final days before the gala, Amelia became the perfect actress. She discussed the seating chart with Julian, feigned excitement about his speech, and allowed him to fuss over her dress. She was a vision of placid serenity. She was letting him walk into a perfectly constructed trap, baited with his own ego. He saw her as a beautiful pregnant figurehead for his perfect life. He had no idea she was a weapon, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. While he was busy managing his affair, Amelia was busy seizing control of the board, leveraging her family's influence, and preparing the speech that would burn his world to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a breathtaking spectacle of corporate opulence. A constellation of crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of New York's elite. The air buzzed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the subtle scent of money and perfume. This was Julian Croft's court, and tonight he was its undisputed king. He stood near the entrance, a vision of tailored perfection in a Tom Ford tuxedo. Amelia was on his arm, radiating a serene, ethereal beauty in a custom Dior gown of deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over her 7-month baby bump. The Croft blue necklace rested against her collarbone, its cold weight a constant reminder of her purpose. She smiled, she nodded. She accepted congratulations on the baby with a grace that felt almost otherworldly. To any observer, they were the picture of power and happiness. Julian was in his element. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, shaking hands with tech rivals, clapping politicians on the back, and charming the society columnists who documented his every move. His eyes, however, kept scanning the room, a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of his gaze. He was looking for Isabella. He found her holding court near the bar, looking stunning in a crimson, backless dress that was both elegant and audacious. She was a slash of vibrant color in a room of muted blacks and metallics. Their eyes met for a fleeting electric moment across the crowded room. It was a look of shared conspiracy of triumph. She raised her glass in a tiny, almost invisible salute. "Our night," the gesture said. Julian squeezed Amelia's arm gently. "I need to go and greet Senator Thompson." He murmured, his voice a perfect blend of duty and affection. "Don't tire yourself out, my love. I'll be right back." Amelia watched him go, her serene smile never wavering. She saw the path he took, a masterfully indirect route that ended for a few precious hidden seconds near the alcove where Isabella was standing. She saw the brief, illicit touch of his hand on Isabella's arm, the whispered word she couldn't hear, but could feel in her bones. The betrayal was so brazen, so confident, it almost took her breath away. But she held her ground, a marble statue in the midst of a swirling party, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. This was not just for her. It was for the son he had used as a shield for his lies. She was approached by Margaret Davies, a sharp-eyed journalist from Forbes. "Amelia, you look absolutely radiant," Margaret gushed. "This initiative for families is so inspiring. Julian is a true visionary." "He certainly has a talent for building things," Amelia replied, her voice smooth and even. The double meaning hung in the air unnoticed by the journalist. But legacy isn't just about what you build. It's about the foundation it's built upon, integrity, honesty. That's what truly lasts. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the formal program. Guests drifted towards their tables, the buzz of conversation softening to an expectant hush. Julian returned to Amelia's side, his face flushed with excitement and power. "Showtime," he whispered, giving her hand a squeeze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw only what he wanted to see, his beautiful pregnant wife, the perfect symbol for a night dedicated to family. They took their seats at the head table. Julian was center stage with Amelia to his right. A few seats down at the adjacent table, reserved for top executives, sat Isabella Rossi. Her vantage point was perfect. She could watch Julian as he delivered his speech, a speech she had helped him write, full of words like, commitment, future, and trust. She felt a thrill of ownership, of being the secret partner in his triumph. The evening's master of ceremonies, a well-known news anchor, took the stage. He welcomed the guests, spoke of the Foundation's incredible work, and then began the introductions. And of course, the man who makes it all possible, a titan of innovation and a true philanthropist, the founder and chairman of Croft Industries, Mr. Julian Croft. A wave of thunderous applause filled the room. Julian stood basking in it, a wide, confident smile spreading across his face. He nodded to the crowd, the picture of a benevolent leader. He sat down, leaning over to Amelia. "Nervous?" he asked, a hint of patronizing charm in his voice. "Not at all," she said, her voice a calm, clear bell. "I feel remarkably centered." The MC continued, his voice booming through the sound system. "This year we wanted to do something a little different. Before our keynote address from Julian, we want to pay tribute to the silent partner in this incredible journey, the heart and soul that inspires the work we do here. It is my distinct honor to introduce a surprise special guest, our true guest of honor tonight." Julian shifted in his seat, a flicker of curiosity on his face. He had approved every detail of the program. There was no surprise guest. He glanced at his chief of staff, who looked just as bewildered. Isabella frowned, a wrinkle of confusion marring her perfect brow. This wasn't in the script. The MC paused for dramatic effect, a wide smile on his face. The entire room was rapt with attention. A woman of immense grace, strength, and a founding patron of this very foundation. Please join me in giving a standing ovation to Mrs. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. The name echoed through the grand ballroom, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft. For a single silent moment, the universe seemed to halt. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room, leaving a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. And in that vacuum, Julian Croft's perfectly constructed world shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale mask of disbelief. His charming smile froze, then collapsed. He turned to Amelia, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into panic. She was already rising, her movements fluid and deliberate. She met his gaze, and for the first time that night, perhaps in years, he saw her. He didn't see the placid, gentle wife. He saw a stranger, a woman with eyes of glacial ice, holding a resolve so absolute it terrified him. There was no love there, no warmth, only judgment. The applause started slowly, a ripple of confusion from the guests, then swelled into a tidal wave as they rose to their feet. They were applauding the narrative, the supportive wife being honored by her loving husband, the beautiful pregnant matriarch of the Croft dynasty. They had no idea they were applauding an executioner walking towards the scaffold. From her table, Isabella Rossi watched the scene unfold with a dawning horror. This was impossible. Amelia was supposed to be a prop, a beautiful piece of scenery. She was not supposed to be the main event. Isabella looked at Julian, seeking some sign, some explanation, but he was a statue, his eyes locked on his wife's ascending form. In that moment, a cold dread snaked its way into Isabella's heart. She felt a fundamental shift in power, a game she didn't know she was playing, being lost in spectacular fashion. Amelia moved towards the stage with a poise that defied the tremor in her hands, a tremor no one but she could feel. Her hand rested on her baby bump, a gesture that now seemed less about maternal affection and more like a warrior shielding their sigil. She ascended the small set of stairs, the spotlight following her, catching the fire in the Croft blue sapphires at her throat. They looked like chips of ice. She reached the podium and turned to face the crowd. The applause slowly died down, replaced by a dense, expectant silence. Hundreds of faces, a gallery of the most powerful people in the city, were turned towards her. She took a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room. She saw her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, in the front row, his face an unreadable mask of grim support. She saw the confused faces of Julian's board members, and she saw Isabella, her crimson dress, now looking like a raw, open wound, her face a portrait of utter bewilderment. Finally, her eyes landed on her husband. Julian was still half standing, caught between sitting and rising his face, a maelstrom of emotions, panic, fear, and a dawning, sickening understanding. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was a trap door and the lever had just been pulled. The MC, oblivious to the undercurrents of an impending catastrophe, beamed at her. "Mrs. Croft, the stage is yours." Amelia leaned towards the microphone. The soft click as it activated was like the cocking of a hammer. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, and when she spoke, her voice was not the soft, gentle tone everyone expected. It was clear, measured, and imbued with an unshakable, devastating authority. "Thank you," she began, the two simple words carrying an impossible weight. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Croft Foundation." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "My husband, Julian, is a builder. He builds companies. He builds technologies. He builds a vision for the future. Tonight we are here to celebrate the building of legacies. But a legacy is not a skyscraper. It cannot be built on a faulty foundation. It cannot be sustained by a beautiful facade that conceals a rotten core. A true legacy, a true family, must be built on the bedrock of one thing: trust." The word trust hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at the head table. Julian flinched, as if he'd been physically struck. Whispers began to ripple through the ballroom. This was not the expected thank you speech. This was something else entirely. Amelia had everyone's complete and undivided attention. She was no longer just the wife. She was the main event, and the show was just beginning. Amelia gripped the sides of the sleek wooden podium, her knuckles white. The spotlight was hot on her face, but she felt a chilling calm settle over her. This was the moment of impact, the culmination of a week of silent, methodical preparation. "Trust," she repeated, her voice resonating with a newfound power. "It is the invisible architecture of everything we hold dear. Our partnerships, our families, our businesses. Without it, the most impressive structures eventually crumble to dust. They become hollow monuments to what could have been." She let her gaze drift over the audience before it settled with surgical precision back on Julian. His face was ashen. He looked trapped, a king suddenly finding himself in a cage of his own making, with all his courtiers watching. "I have been a silent partner in the Croft Foundation since its inception." Amelia continued, her voice unwavering. "My family's name and resources were some of the first to seed its promise. We did so because we believed in its mission to support families, to provide stability, security, and a safe harbor for those facing hardship. To build homes, not just houses." She took a sip of water, a deliberate, theatrical pause that drew the tension in the room to a breaking point. The whispers had died down, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. Every phone in the room was now discreetly recording. "But in recent months, I have been forced to reconsider what it means to be a silent partner. Silence can be misconstrued. It can be mistaken for complicity, for ignorance, for weakness." She looked away from Julian and towards the section where the board members were seated. A foundation like a marriage is a vow. It's a public promise of integrity. When that promise is broken in private, the public facade becomes a lie. And I will not, for the sake of appearances, lend my name, my family's name, or my child's future name to a lie. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was no longer subtext. It was a declaration of war. Isabella Rossi felt the blood rush to her head. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. The eyes of those at her table were flicking towards her, the whispers now containing her name. Her association with Julian, once a source of pride and power, had just become a career-ending liability. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Amelia's voice dropped, becoming more intimate, more personal, drawing the audience in even closer. Tonight's theme is building legacies. I have been thinking a great deal about the legacy I want to build for my son. Her hand went to her belly. He will learn that wealth is not a measure of a man's worth. He will learn that true strength lies not in power but in character. He will learn that honesty is not a strategy, but a core principle. And he will learn that you cannot claim to support the sanctity of the family in a grand ballroom while you desecrate your own at home. The final sentence landed like a guillotine. The insinuation was so clear, so brutally direct, that no one could misinterpret it. The cameras which had been focused on Amelia now swiveled towards Julian, the lenses hungry for his reaction. He looked utterly broken, his public mask of charisma and control stripped away, revealing the panicked, guilty man beneath. And so, Amelia announced her voice, rising again with command. I am taking a more active role in this foundation, starting tonight. As a gesture of my renewed commitment, a commitment to true integrity, I am making a personal contribution. It is my understanding that the legacy gift for this evening was to be a $1 million pledge from the corporate fund. She paused. I find that insufficient. She looked directly at her father, who gave a single sharp nod. Tonight I am personally pledging $50 million from the Vanderbilt Trust. The room erupted in gasps and applause, a wave of shock and excitement. To a new initiative. Amelia continued, speaking over the noise, her voice cutting through it all. This initiative will be managed by me, and it will be dedicated exclusively to building and funding women's shelters and providing legal aid for women and children leaving toxic and deceitful domestic environments. It was a masterstroke. She hadn't just exposed him. She had seized his philanthropic narrative, repurposed his foundation, and funded it with her own money, all in one devastating move. She had publicly branded him a liar and a cheat without ever using those words, and then positioned herself as the savior of the very women he had created. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces one last time. "Thank you," she said with a finality that was absolute. "Enjoy your evening." And with that she turned, not looking back at the wreckage she had wrought, and walked off the stage. Her personal security men, loyal to her father and prearranged, moved swiftly to her side, forming a protective barrier. The gala was in chaos. The night was over. Julian Croft's reign had ended. The moment Amelia stepped off the stage, the carefully orchestrated elegance of the gala disintegrated into chaos. The stunned silence was shattered by an explosion of frantic murmuring that grew into a deafening roar. Guests were on their feet, not in applause, but in a frenzy of gossip and disbelief. Phones were held aloft not to capture a memory, but to send out the bombshell news to the world. The hashtag Lasha Croft Gala was already trending, fueled by a torrent of grainy videos and speculative tweets. Julian remained frozen at the head table, the spotlight that had once been his friend, now feeling like an interrogation lamp. The applause for Amelia's $50 million pledge had been genuine, but it was aimed at her, a celebration of her power play, not a commendation of his foundation. To them, he was now the villain in her story. He saw it in the eyes of his board members who were pointedly avoiding his gaze, instead locked in hushed, panicked conversations. He saw it in the faces of his business rivals who wore expressions of poorly concealed glee. His first instinct was to go to Amelia, to fix it, to control it. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor, and moved to intercept her. But her exit was a perfectly executed maneuver. Two imposing security guards, men he didn't recognize, flanked her instantly. Her father, Arthur Vanderbilt, met her at the bottom of the stage stairs, placing a protective arm around her. They formed an impenetrable unit, sweeping through the parting crowd towards a private exit, ignoring the cacophony of questions being shouted by the press. "Amelia!" Julian called out, his voice hoarse. It was lost in the din. She didn't turn. She didn't even hesitate. It was as if he no longer existed. His second instinct was to find Isabella. He scanned the room, his eyes wild with desperation. He spotted her, a lone figure in a sea of chaos. She was trying to make a quiet exit, but Margaret Davies, the Forbes journalist, had cornered her. Julian could see the predatory gleam in the reporter's eyes, the pointed questions being fired at a pale and shaken Isabella. Her career, which had been hitched so tightly to his, was now in a nosedive, and she was the most obvious target for the media's hunger for a name. He had made her complicit, and now she was paying the price. A hand clamped down on Julian's shoulder. It was Marcus Thorne, the oldest and most influential member of the Croft Industries board. His face, usually jovial, was a grim mask of fury. "Fix this, Julian," Marcus hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You have until the market opens on Monday. A statement, a retraction, something. You have endangered this entire company with your mess." He didn't wait for a reply, turning his back on Julian in a gesture of ultimate dismissal. The ballroom felt like it was closing in on him. The flashes of the cameras were like small explosions, disorienting and relentless. He had to get out. Stumbling through the throng, he ignored the shouted questions and the sympathetic, pitying looks, which were somehow worse than the scornful ones. He made it to the service exit and burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath like a drowning man. His driver was waiting with the Rolls-Royce, his face impassive. "The penthouse, Mr. Croft." "Yes." Julian croaked, his throat dry. The drive through the glittering streets of Manhattan was a silent tour of his downfall. The city lights, once a symbol of his triumph, now seemed to mock him. He pulled out his phone. It was a wildfire of notifications. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of text messages and emails. The first alerts from major news outlets were already popping up. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft stuns at gala pledges, 50 minutos to women's shelters, in scathing rebuke of husband Julian Croft. Chaos at Croft Foundation. Gala what was behind. Amelia Croft's shocking speech. Croft Industries, stock futures, plummet in after-hours trading, following gala drama. He tried calling Amelia. It went straight to a number that was no longer in service. He had been cut off. He called her father, Arthur. It rang once, then disconnected. Blocked. When he arrived at the penthouse, it was a cavern of silence. The air was cold. He walked into their bedroom, his heart pounding, a sickening rhythm against his ribs. The signs of her departure were subtle but absolute. The closet was half empty, her clothes and shoes gone. The jewelry box on her vanity was open empty, save for one item placed dead center, the Croft blue sapphire necklace. A returned gift. A final severing. On the bed where she had likely read the messages that sealed his fate was a single thick envelope. His name was written on the front in her elegant, familiar script. His hands trembled as he tore it open. It contained legal documents, divorce papers filed that very afternoon, and a restraining order citing emotional distress and infidelity, barring him from contacting her or coming within 500 feet of her. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the papers slipping from his numb fingers. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost control. In a single evening, Amelia, the fragile woman he thought he was managing, had outmaneuvered him at every turn. She had taken his power, his reputation, and his son, all while the world watched. He was alone in the silent, opulent tomb he had built for himself, the echoes of her final words ringing in his ears. The legacy he was so proud of was now irrevocably a legacy of lies. The days that followed the gala were a slow, agonizing bleed. The world Julian Croft had commanded was now a hostile territory. The market opened on Monday to a bloodbath. Croft Industries' stock plunged over 30%, wiping out billions in value. The headline story wasn't about their cutting-edge AI anymore. It was about the sordid details of the CEO's personal life. The board convened an emergency meeting from which Julian was pointedly excluded. By noon they had issued a public statement. Julian Croft was taking an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. His empire had been taken from him while he was locked out of the building. His attempts to fight back were futile. Amelia and the Vanderbilts had been preparing for this war long before he knew it had been declared. His best lawyers were met with a legal firewall so thick it was impenetrable. Every asset, every account, every part of his life that was intertwined with Amelia's was frozen, locked down, or already under her control. The prenuptial agreement, which he had always considered ironclad, had an infidelity clause he'd long forgotten, a clause so punitive it would strip him of a vast portion of his marital assets. It had been Amelia's father's sole insisted-upon term. Desperate and isolated, Julian finally did what he should have done. A week ago he went to the Soho apartment. He needed to see Isabella, the one person he thought was still on his side. He found her packing boxes, her face pale and drawn, her fiery energy extinguished. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hollow. Isabella didn't look at him. She just kept throwing clothes and books haphazardly into a box. "I was fired," she said, her voice flat and brittle. "An email this morning, effective immediately. Morality clause. They even had security escort me from my office like a common criminal." "Bella, I'm sorry," he began. "Sorry." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a venomous rage that startled him. "You're sorry. You told me she was fragile. You told me the marriage was a business arrangement. You sold me a story Julian and I was stupid enough to build my future on it." She threw a book into the box with such force that the corners crumpled. "Did you ever intend to leave her? Or was I just a convenient, exciting distraction from your perfect life?" "Of course I did," he insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to him. The timing was just complicated. Complicated. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "No, you weren't complicated. You were a coward. You wanted everything. The respectable wife and the adoring mistress. You wanted the legacy and the thrill. And you ended up with nothing. And you dragged me down with you." She sealed the box with a screech of packing tape. "My career is ruined. My name is synonymous with your scandal. I'm the other woman, the homewrecker, while your wife is being hailed as some feminist icon, a hero for scorned women everywhere. She didn't just ruin you, Julian. She destroyed me as an afterthought." He had no answer. She was right. He had seen Isabella not as a person, but as a component of the life he wanted a solution to his own boredom and ego. He had never considered the consequences for her, because he never believed there would be any. "Get out," she whispered, her anger suddenly spent, leaving only a vast, empty exhaustion. "Get out of my apartment. Out of my life." He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Another door closed to a life that no longer existed. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own creation. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum of his failures. The city that had once bowed to him now felt like a cage. Months later, a semblance of a new reality began to emerge from the rubble. The divorce was finalized in a quiet, brutal settlement that favored Amelia entirely. She had given birth to a son, Arthur Vanderbilt, a name that pointedly erased the Croft lineage. News articles showed her serene and strong, spearheading her new foundation, which was already opening shelters across the country. She had not only survived, she had transformed her pain into a purpose, becoming a powerful advocate and a symbol of resilience. She had taken his betrayal and built a better legacy from it. Julian was a recluse. He had kept a fraction of his fortune enough to live in luxury forever, but his name was poison in the tech world and in society. His comeback attempts were met with derision. He was a cautionary tale told in boardrooms and business schools. One evening he saw a picture online. It was from a charity event. Amelia was holding her son. She was smiling a genuine, radiant smile he hadn't seen on her face in years. The boy had her eyes. In that moment, staring at the screen, Julian finally understood the full scope of what he had lost. It wasn't just the company, the money, or the reputation. He had lost a family. He had traded a foundation of trust for a thrilling facade, and just as she had predicted, on that fateful night, his entire world had crumbled to dust. He had built an empire, but in the end, he had no legacy at all. 5 years is a lifetime. For Julian Croft, it had been a purgatory. The inferno of his public immolation had long since cooled, leaving behind a quiet, desolate landscape. The billions were gone, chewed up by the divorce settlement legal fees and the stock collapse. He lived now in a modest, modern house in Northern California under the name James. It was a life of anonymity he had once craved on his most stressful days, but now found to be a suffocating cloak of his own failure. He ran a small tech consultancy, successful enough to be comfortable but insignificant enough to remain invisible. The ghost of Julian Croft was too toxic to be resurrected. He never remarried. He dated occasionally, but the connections were shallow, hollowed out by the crater of his past. The truth was, his heart had been cauterized on the night of the gala. He had learned a brutal lesson in value, that he had traded something priceless for something worthless, and the debt of that transaction was lifelong. He kept track of her, of course. It was a form of self-flagellation. Amelia Vanderbilt was no longer the Croft. She had shed his name like a contaminated skin. She was now a philanthropic powerhouse, a revered figure on the global stage. Her foundation, the Phoenix Initiative, had become a global benchmark for supporting women and children. She was a regular at Davos and the UN General Assembly, her voice carrying the weight of authentic conviction. In every photo, she radiated a calm, indomitable strength. And then there was Arthur, his son. Julian watched him grow up through the sterile lens of magazine articles and paparazzi photos. He saw a boy with Amelia's graceful features, and he imagined a spark of his own curiosity in his eyes. He knew the boy's favorite color was green, that he loved sailing with his grandfather, and that he had a dog named Captain. He knew these trivial facts because he devoured every scrap of information he could find a father trying to construct a child out of hearsay and pixels. The pain of this distant, one-sided relationship was a constant low-grade ache in his chest. Isabella Rossi had vanished for 3 years, only to re-emerge in Singapore. She had rebranded, founding a successful marketing firm under a new name, her past a carefully buried secret that the international business community seemed willing to overlook. Julian sometimes wondered if she too was haunted. He suspected she was. The breaking point for Julian's quiet exile came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in San Francisco for a meeting and saw them. In a small park overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Amelia was pushing Arthur on a swing. The sight was so mundane, so beautifully normal, it shattered him. The laughter of the son he had never met carried on the wind, a sound more devastating than any shouted accusation. He watched from a distance, a ghost at the edge of his own family's life, until they left. That night he decided he could not live the rest of his life as a spectator. He didn't want his money back. He didn't want his fame. He just wanted his son to know he existed. Through a mutually respected elderly lawyer who had known both families for decades, he requested a meeting with Amelia. He made it clear he would not contest the restraining order which had long since expired, but was asking for a single voluntary conversation, for the sake of Arthur. 2 weeks later, to his profound surprise, she agreed. They met in the neutral territory of the lawyer's empty wood-panelled office. When Amelia walked in, Julian felt the air leave his lungs. She was more formidable than he remembered. The 5 years had stripped away any lingering softness and replaced it with a polished, unyielding poise. There was no anger in her eyes any more. That fire had been used to forge the woman she was now. What was left was a cool, dispassionate calm that was far more intimidating. "Julian," she said, her voice even. It wasn't a question. "Amelia, thank you for coming," he said, his own voice sounding rough to his ears. They sat at opposite ends of a long mahogany table. For a moment, the silence was absolute. "I didn't ask for this meeting to ask you for anything," he began, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Not for forgiveness, not for a second chance. God knows I don't deserve either. I asked to be here to say what I should have said 5 years ago, without the world watching. I'm sorry. Not for my career or the money. I'm sorry for breaking my vows to you. I'm sorry for the humiliation and the pain I caused. I was a coward and I was a fool. You built a life of meaning on the rubble of what I destroyed, and you have my unending respect and admiration for that." Amelia listened, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer him a comforting nod or a word of absolution. She simply let him speak. "I have a son," Julian continued, his voice cracking slightly. "And he doesn't know I exist. I know that's my fault. I abdicated my right to be his father that night. But he's getting older. He's going to ask questions. I want him to know that he was not abandoned, that he was the product of a love that was real once, and that his father is deeply, profoundly sorry for his failures." He finally finished the confession, leaving him feeling hollowed out. The decision was hers. Amelia was silent for a full minute, her fingers steepled in front of her. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, precise, and final. "I appreciate your apology, Julian," she said. "I believe it's sincere. But an apology doesn't mend what was broken. You speak of trust. I will never, ever trust you again. My life and my son's life is built on a foundation of safety and honesty. You are a risk I will not allow into that foundation." Julian's flicker of hope died. He nodded slowly, accepting it. "I understand." "But," she added, and he looked up, "you are right about one thing. Arthur is not a pawn, and he is not a prize. He is a person, and he deserves the whole truth when he is old enough to understand it. I will not lie to him." She stood up, her presence commanding the room. "When Arthur turns 18, I will give him a letter. In that letter, I will tell him everything. The good from our beginning and the truth of our end. I will also include your contact information, should you wish to provide it. If at that time he chooses to seek you out, it will be his decision alone. I will not stand in his way. She paused at the door. Until then, you will make no attempt to contact him or me. You will continue to watch from a distance. That is the only legacy you have left with us. A choice that belongs to your son, 13 years from now. Goodbye, Julian. And then she was gone. Julian sat alone in the silent office for a long time. It was not the reconciliation he might have dreamed of in his darkest moments, but it was more than he deserved. It was a sliver of a chance, a seed of a possibility planted in a distant future. It was a reckoning that was not a single fiery event, but a long, quiet, and painful penance. He had been given a date for his potential redemption 13 years from now, and until then, he would wait a ghost in the life of the son he had, and the man he once was. Julian Croft's story is a chilling reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. It's a story about the lies we tell ourselves and the devastating cost of betrayal. He thought he could have two worlds, but ended up losing them both, all because he underestimated the quiet strength of the woman he wronged. Amelia Vanderbilt Croft shows us that from the ashes of heartbreak, it's possible to rise stronger, to reclaim your narrative, and to build a new legacy founded not on a name or a fortune, but on unwavering integrity. Their saga serves as a powerful lesson. The most valuable asset you can ever have is trust, and once it's broken, it's a debt no amount of money can ever repay. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill of betrayal and the fire of retribution, show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves intense, real-life drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We bring you the most compelling stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let us know in the comments, was Amelia's revenge justified? We want to hear from you.